Reclamation rarely announces itself. It shows up as the reasonable next step after survival. It's the moment a people who have been scattered and brutalized begin to build institutions to hold what's left. And in that building, something gets negotiated away that wasn't meant to be part of the negotiation. This is not an indictment of the people who built. They were doing what people do after catastrophic losses. They were trying to create something stable enough to stand on. Please know, tragedy isn't in the intention. It's in what was already waiting inside the blueprint they reached for. After emancipation, the Black church became the central container of Black community life in America. And that sentence needs to be held with full complexity because both halves of it are true simultaneously. The central container meant real power, real community, real continuity of culture in conditions that were still actively hostile to Black life. The church was the school, the meeting hall, the mutual aid society, the place where dignity was practiced when the surrounding world refused to recognize it. That was not nothing. That was survival architecture built by people who understood that without a container, what they were carrying would scatter. But the theological framework, the ecclesiastical structure, the codes of conduct and hierarchy and moral governance for that container was not drawn from the spiritual tradition the church believed it was continuing. It was drawn from white evangelical Protestantism, Eurocentric colonial crusades. It held the same tradition that had been used to justify enslavement. The same framework that had originally handed those hymns to enslaved people as a management tool. It came in through the denominations, through the seminaries that trained Black ministers in the image of white ecclesiastical authority, through the missionary frameworks that had always conflated Christianity with a very specific cultural expression of Christianity. And it settled into the church as a divine inheritance. I grew up in that inheritance. Apostolic, Pentecostal, holiness, the women in long skirts and doilies, no jewelry, no makeup, men in suits, khakis and slacks, no premarital contact, no social stimulants, no secular music. The boundaries were total, and the boundaries were presented as the unmediated will of God. And I want to be very careful here, because the people inside that system, including my mom, much of my family, the woman who pulled me aside after my solo, they were not wrong about everything. The anointing was and is real. The aliveness I felt as a child was real. A genuine grounding force was moving through that space. But the rules were not the source of what was real. The rules were the container, and the container had been shaped by hands that were not trying to set anyone free. What gets handed down through generations inside a managed system is both things simultaneously. It's the genuine current of truth that survived the reclamation and the management layer that presents itself as inseparable from that truth. The people inside it aren't choosing sedation consciously. They are receiving something real and something installed as if they were the same thing. Because by the time it reaches them, those two things have been so infused together long enough that separating them feels like destruction. That fusion is the mechanism. That's how reclamation sustains itself across generations without ever having to announce itself again. The same process was moving through the music. When the spiritual thread began migrating out of the church and into the broader culture through blues, through jazz, through the rhythm and feeling that would eventually become rock and roll, R&B, soul, country, hip hop, and trap and pop music, it was carrying something with it. The encoded knowing, the body intelligence that the original tradition had always understood as sacred and holy. And the music industry met it the same way the colonial crusades had always met something it couldn't control. It organized it, controlled the narrative. It separated the genres from each other and from their common source. It drew lines between sacred and secular, between black music and white music, between what was acceptable in church and what was acceptable on the radio. These were lines that were presented as natural distinctions, but were in fact deliberate divisions. Because a fragmented lineage is easier to monetize than an intact one. A people who don't recognize their own thread across genres can't organize around it. Elvis could carry the sound without carrying the lineage. The industry could sell the root without crediting the tree. And the church, for its part, policed the boundary from the other side, declaring secular music spiritually contaminated, keeping its congregations from recognizing that what was moving through both was the same original current. The spiritual had started as a unified body, community, music, liberation, operating as one integrated system. But by the middle of the 20th century, that system had been dismembered. The sacred was over here, the secular was over there. The genres didn't know they were related. And the people inside each container were being told that the container was the point. This is what managed grief looks like at a cultural scale. Don't misinterpret this as a lack of feeling, because feeling was everywhere, in the church, in the music, in the culture, but the feeling was rigidly contained, moving through channels that had been shaped to produce specific outputs and prevent others. Like the shout in the church that never becomes a question, the hit song that moves you and then leaves you exactly where you were, the sermon that names your suffering so accurately that you feel seen and then tells you that endurance is the response. All of it carries something real. All of it also functions as a pressure release valve, giving the grief somewhere to go that isn't through to the other side into clarity, into the kind of knowing that changes what you do next. Not repeat the same thing expecting a different result. You see, music can process grief or it can manage it. The same song can do either, depending on what the container around it is inviting the grief to become. And most of us, raised inside these systems, formed by them, genuinely nourished by the real thing that moved through them, most of us have never been given the distinction, have never been handed the framework to feel the difference between grief moving and grief being managed, suppressed, and controlled. Which means we've been living in a pain that never got properly named, reaching back to the same containers that produced the pain to try and soothe it, and calling that faith. There is a question I get asked in certain spaces when there is an awareness of my work as a life coach, an author, a music artist, And that question is, what church are you affiliated with? It's a reasonable question. It's how people within faith-based systems locate you, how they determine whether you're speaking the same language, whether you're trustworthy, whether the thing moving through you has been properly authorized by a recognized institution. It's the religious equivalent of a credential check. And for a long time, the honest answer didn't fit inside the framework the question was built for. But the honest answer is, I'm a free agent. Not because I walked away from faith, not because the anointing I felt as a child turned out to be nothing, or because my mother's voice singing Isaiah 40 and 31 was a beautiful fiction I've since outgrown. None of that is what happened. What happened is I remembered how to distinguish between the energetic current and the energetic container. The current, the electrical, spiritual, energetic current was and is always real. The aliveness, the recognition, the something moving through a room when people bring their full bodies into contact with a truth larger than themselves, that is real. I have felt it in churches. I have felt it in concert halls. I have felt it alone at a piano at 2 a.m. I have felt it in conversations where someone says something that lands in the body before the mind can process it. That frequency doesn't belong to a denomination. It never did, and it never will. What belongs to the denomination is the management and the control of who gets access to it, under what conditions, through what authorized channels, with what behavioral requirements attached, and the authorized timeline and time frame. That's the container. And the container, as we've established here, was not designed by the tradition it claims to be protecting. So when someone asks me what church I'm affiliated with, what I'm really hearing underneath the question is, where have you submitted yourself to be contained? And the answer is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Wherever there is genuine, unperforming, non-transactional love, that is church to me. Wherever there is compassion that doesn't require me to earn it through compliance and compromise, wherever there is an understanding spacious enough to hold contradiction without forcing it into judgment, that is faith. That is God. That is source. That is whatever name you need to put on the thing that was always already moving underneath every system that ever tried to manage, suppress, or control it. I am not against anyone still inside containers like this. I need to say that clearly because this essay could be mistaken for that, and it isn't. Church hurt and abuse and misuse are real. My church hurt, because yes, I had it, real and specific and formative, has been processed and resolved. It's not suppressed. It's not managed. It's resolved, which means I moved through it far enough to come out the other side without the bitterness that would make me need to tear the container down to prove something. I have limits now, very clear ones, but limits are not condemnations. They're just the honest shape of where I end and where something else begins. What actually shifted the relationship from hurt to resolution was the body level, nervous system integrated remembering. Remembering the difference between where the conviction comes from. I still sing gospel songs with full conviction, with everything in my body available to what the song is carrying. But the conviction doesn't come from the place it used to come from. It used to come from a kind of anxious devotion, the fear underneath the worship, the hoping God approved, the performing sincerity hard enough that it might count as the real thing. The colonial framework had installed that operating system so deep inside the tradition that most people inside it can't feel where the genuine devotion ends and the managed anxiety begins. The two have been fused for so long, they feel like one thing. And the conviction I sing from now comes from embodiment, from the body actually knowing what it's carrying rather than performing what it's been told to carry. From the recognition that the truth the song is pointing toward is not somewhere outside waiting to be earned. It's already present, already moving, already the ground underneath every genuine moment of aliveness I have ever felt. What many would interpret as a rejection of the tradition is simply the tradition remembering what it was before it got managed. And not everybody's process runs at the same speed. Personal responsibility enters the chat here, because here is what I had to sit with, and what I think is worth naming directly for anyone who is hearing this and feeling something shift. The system did what it did. The colonial distortion is real. The reclamation of the liberation movement is historically documented and personally verifiable. None of that is in question. And paradoxically, there comes a point where the unprocessed, unnamed, accumulated grief of a people and of individual people within that people that has been managed inside that system will make a deliberate choice to continue to reach back to the same container to soothe themselves. It's not a conscious choice at first, not even a malicious one, but a choice nonetheless. Here's the practical takeaway. The container will hold you for as long as you need it to. It was designed to. It's genuinely load-bearing for the people inside it. It's providing community, continuity, a place where the grief has permission to exist, even if it doesn't have permission to move all the way through. But there is a difference between a container that's holding you while you gather strength and a container that's holding you in place, like a prison. And only you can feel which one it is. That's not something an essay can tell you. It's not something a theologian can tell you, a therapist, or even a life coach, or an author can tell you, or even someone who loves you can tell you. It lives in a register that is below argument and below doctrine and below the part of you that knows how to perform certainty. It lives in the body, in the same place that knew my mother's song was true before I had any framework to understand why. In the same place that felt the anointing and didn't need a name for it yet. In the same place that had been carrying a pain you may not have known to call grief. Until now. If you've gained any insight from this video, please become a subscriber if you aren't already. Like, comment, share what landed the most for you here. Feel free to support my resources at the link in my caption so that I can improve and expand what I share here. In the meantime and in between time, please be kind and gentle with yourself in this right now moment and in the right now moments to come.